Okay, today I'm gonna talk about Redux, right? So actually, this is Redux is okay. Actually, this is an independent library. It is not only used by React and can be also used by other front-end libraries, Vue or Angular. But actually, it is mostly used by React because Vue itself has a Vuex to manage global state. Okay, so first is Redux is not react-redux. It is used for managing global states. So what is global states? So imagine there is some states that you need to gonna be used by many components at the same time. So you want to store your global states or public states somewhere. In this case, in Redux, it is stored in store object, and then once the state has been updated, and all the related or subscribed components can be notified. How Redux works. So this is the workflow diagram of Redux offshore. As you can see it here, so there is a UI component. Click something, generate an action object, includes tab and a data property, and after the reducer and store. After the manipulation by the store and the reducer, we will generate a new state. Then, finally, set the state to re-render the component. So generally, so UI event create Redux action. It's not actually this is action is the concept of Redux, right? Includes which is an object, includes tab, and tab it is event or event, and the data. And new action will be dispatched to store object. Store object stores existing object. If there is, this is the first time without existing state, reducer will create one. Reducer manipulate existing state based on past action, and family generate a new state which will then notify all put it. Alright, so this is the workflow of Redux. Never mind if you don't, just don't worry if you don't understand what I'm talking about, and you cannot just digest, understand the workflow of the Redux. I can show you this, show you Redux step by step, based on an calculator application. First, I'm gonna write calculator app using raw React. Yeah. So we still use this empty React project as a at the beginning, right? So okay, so we don't need this two components. We need a count component, right? So count. So count index.js. Oh. Let's give it a calculator app. I have to display some value. For the moment, it is question mark. And no such field count index. Okay. So in this count, we have select option 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and give it a space break. After that, we need several buttons, right? So this is add. Minus increment if odd. If the sub value is odd, right? So increment asynchronous. Okay. Let me put this dev style. Let's give this dev the dev element a style. Let's do width and margin. Margin top checks. Okay, so using the use React we have learned from the previous classes. We just add some functions, right? So we just add some functions here. On click this dot increment, right? This dot decrement, this dot increment f odd, this dot async increment, right? Yeah. So we need some handlers, right? So arrow increment. Then we need get a value from so current node input probably equal to current node. We get this value. This dot set state count. This dot state dot count plus this dot input dot value initialize count. What's wrong here? Okay, it's concatenating, right? So shouldn't we want a calculator to do mathematics? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So it works. Then we need to decrement. Decrement and increment if odd. This dot state dot count modulus 2 is not equal to 0. Async increment set timeout. Async increment. Async increment. Okay. 1, 2, 1, 2. Right? So okay, so we have already read this using a raw JavaScript. Now we write example about using Redux without action creator. Why we just leave this we just focus on this part. So action has already been created, and pass it to store, because I want to show that Redux how to use Redux step by step. We don't want to go whole process at once, which will might confuse you a little bit. So we need two files, store.js and reducer. What does this mean? Let's just take a look at this picture again. So you need a store object here, right, to store the states, and you need a reducer to manipulate data, right? And then we get a new state right here. So we just create a action ourselves for the moment. It's nothing special, just an object with tab property and data property. So okay, back to this. Make Redux, create a store.js and count.reducer.js. So each action or each component should has its own reducer, you know. So if there are many other components, each component has its own reducer to manipulate the state change or action created by that component individually, independently. Right? So I have store. So how do we create a store? Of course, we need APIs called create store from Redux, right? So at this moment, of course, we need to npm install Redux. While it is installing, we export default create a store, and we need a count reducer. Right, as you can see here, so reducer is inside of store, right? So each store need its own reducer to manipulate data, and we just need to create our reducer. Export reducer is a function, and which will manipulate the state. So there should be one previous state or existing state, and an action object, right? We get this option object. There's two things, tab and the data. Right, and now we import count reducer from count reducer, right? So we only need these 3 lines of code in the store to create a new store object. Then you can just, you know, dispatch action, you can store your states, and you can use reducer whatever you want. So instead of this reducer, so we're gonna judge the tab. If it is the tab increment, we can return brief state plus data. Right. Decrement. States. This is a default. So we have our created store object and a reducer, so we can use Redux now. And how do we use that? We back to this count component. Right, so right here we can use this store dispatch. What do we dispatch? Go back to this dispatch action to store object, right? So this is an object. An object is tab increment and data this dot input dot value and multiply by one. All right, we don't need this anymore. So store. So we need to use store. Okay? So we just import this object from dot redux store. Okay? So we can use that. And in this decrement, we have decrement. So in this if odd, we have increment again. We have increment again. Okay. Nope. Okay. This one should stay, right? 0.5 second, right? Okay. Now we have dispatched the action to store, and the reducer in the store will deal with this for us. Right? So we don't need this state anymore, right? Because our state has to be managed by the store object in Redux. But if you want some other, state like car name, vehicle, you still can store this local state in this component, which is because this car name is not used by all other components, right? So you can just use that locally. We have dispatch this. Yep. And okay, let's do add. It seems like it doesn't work. Right. Cannot read property now of count of now. Yeah, because what? Because now you have no state anymore, right? You have already deleted the state, so you cannot get the count value in this way anymore. Instead, you need to use store.get state, this API, to get the value. Right? Oh, it's not a number. Okay, back to this. The pref state, we give it a default value 0 because it's calculator, right? So at the beginning it should be 0. Let's click add. There's nothing happen and there's no error message. Why? Why? Okay, let me tell you this. So after dispatch, I want to display the value. So store.get state. Let's see what happened here. Okay. Add 1, add 2, add 3. So the state has already been changed, but the page, it seems like the page has not been re-rendered, right? So because Redux is only responsible for creating a new state or new value based on your action and the previous state. So if you want to re-render the page, you have to do it manually. Redux won't do that for you. So how do we re-render this? Of course, we have component. Store subscribe. Right? You need to subscribe store. And so when the value in the store has been changed or modified based on some action, then you can just re-render your component, right? So your component will be notified. But you will ask me like, oh, we don't have the value, we don't have the new value, right? Because reducer did it for us. Look at this page. Okay? Reducer generated a new state, but we don't know what is the new state, right? So you don't need to use a new state. You just need to re-render this component manually. That's it. So because the object inside the set state is merged, right? We have already talked about them from last class and in the previous classes before. So we just render an empty object here just to re-render the component. That's it. 1, 2, 3, 4 is increment. If odd, minus, add. Okay, so it works. But suppose another question is, suppose, so now this is the count component that you subscribe store object, right? So what if you have many components at the same time, right? So this is a big web application, maybe 100 components in total, and you cannot just do this all the time in every component, which gonna be not compact efficient enough. So what do? We instead subscribe store in the component date mount or in the local component. We have a file entry. We can subscribe right here to render, right? So once the state change, the state in store change, all the component will be rendered. But you don't have to worry about the efficiency because we have .define algorithm we have already talked about before. So it won't affect the efficiency. It will rewrite all components, the whole components, right? Only modified component will be rewrite. If you use it, you have to import this first. Async increment minus add 1, 2, 3, 4, add 9, right? So it works. Back to this readme file. So we're gonna rewrite example above using Redux with action creator. Okay. So now we need to create our own action creator. So there are two new object or files or module needed. The first one is CountAction. Another one is constant. Okay. In the Redux folder, we create a CountAction.js. So what does this CountAction do? CountAction. It actually just get the data from the UI component right here, right? So you just get the data from the UI component and create a new action will be passed into store, right? So this is like the event handler here is pretty similar to count action creator, right? Count action. So of course we need to accept default function. We can accept tab and data and return tab and tab data and data, right? Which is just tab data, right? But here we want to compare this with async redux function, redux action creator. So right here I don't want to do this. Again, I want to remove this. I just want to get a data. We just want to get the data. We want one action creator to correspond to each action. So it means that we have a component, right? So right here we want to use action creator to create this, but we only want to pass this value to the function, and we pass the the tab ourselves. So we can do it this way. Export function increment action data. Return tab increment and then data. So we want to just make it more compact, right? Export cost increment action okay, just leave it this way. Alright, it doesn't matter. Yeah, so we need another creation. So decrement action. Which will return decrement, right? Okay. Increment action, decrement action, right? So we're back to this. So we don't have to create an action ourselves manually. Right? We can use our action creator. So increment action, decrement action from Redux count action, right? So increment, we don't need this object anymore. Instead we can let's just comment this out. All right, so store.dispatch and increment action this.input.value multiply by 1. Store.dispatch. Let's just comment this, alright? Copy this. Decrement action this.input.value 1. increment action this dot input dot value number 1. Increment action this dot input the value 1. Oh, this is too much, right? Okay, 1, 2, 1 and 2, 1 and 2. Okay, so it works. Now we have our own, action creator. It's nothing special. It's just like this is a functional module, right? We create it ourselves. Manually. And you may have already noticed that. Like, let me open this reducer file. So there is an increment. There is a decrement. They are both tabs, action tabs, right? So in the real world project, we don't want to do it, tap those things, manually all the time, because suppose you have many actions or many reducers, and when you change one tab, you need to change a lot of them. So normally in real life project, we need another const file folder to make this a const. So whenever we want to change the tab, we change one constant. That will be enough, right? So I'm gonna create a constant.js. So constant export const increment dot equal to increment decrement increment decrement, right? So in this case, we don't need to we can use constant instead. Pure increment decrement from const. Okay. Import. Let's copy this, right? Increment decrement. All right. Async increment if odd minus add. Right. So okay. So back to readme. And the last thing we're gonna talk about is, so based on what we have learned right now, we have from this class, you have already be able to create your own Redux, right? But there's one more thing. So example about using async action creator. If you take a look at my code in detail, So right here. Okay, look at this line of code. So we actually set timeout here in the component, in the local component. So why do we do this? Why don't we just because I want to make this more, how to say, it looks more unified, right? I just wanted this the async function also similar, looks like this. How do we do that? So we can still define the set timeout function in the reducer in the action. But we cannot. But based on the rules of the Redux, the action must be an object. Look at this. It is an object, action object, right? But sometimes, suppose there is a scenario. I get some value. I get some data from the UI component, right? So ID, title of article, stuff like that. Then I want to get the content of this user based on the ID, or get the content of this article based on the title. So I can just create such an object, action object right here, using async function, because you retrieve something from server. That's typically async function, right? So that's the reason why I add an async function here to demonstrate how we use Redux. And of course, right here, we don't need to use set timeouts in the local component all the time. We still can do this in this action creator file, but because only the object action object type of action is allowed. So how do we do that? We use a middleware to deal with this, so that we can use an action function to create action object. It's not kind of actually an object anymore. It's just a function. So we call it async action. We call it async action. So how do we do that? Let's just comment the read redux thunk directly. We use this middleware to create a async action right here. Alright, set timeout. So if you want to use it, first you need to import this. Okay, in npm install redux npm install redux thunk. Right. So right here you can copy this to this. How do we call it? We call it async increment action, right? Yes, with dispatch. Okay. So with this, what do we dispatch? We dispatch a synchronous function to return an action object, right? So we can just simply use the action here. Okay. So increment action data timeout 500. So we don't need this timeout anymore. Instead, right here we do async increment action. Of course, we need to import async increment action. Okay. Okay, has been already installed successfully, and we're back to this. Oh. Export. Okay. Count action. Async increment action is not export from Redux count action. Has already been. It has already been exported. Do I have some tempo? Okay, let's restart server. Oh. Okay, there must be a typo somewhere. So okay. So count index.js to count async increment action export function async increment action. Okay, there. Okay, there's a typo there. The action must be a plain object. Instead, the actual type was a function. You may need to add a middleware to your store setup to handle dispatching other values. Okay, such as Redux Async. Okay, so it says you need to add middleware to your store setup. So we come to this store file. It says we need to add a middleware here, right? So let's take a look. How do we add a middleware here? Anyway, we just import this, right? And store. Oh, right here, as you can see here. So then to enable Redux Async, use apply middleware, right? And here root reducer, and then apply middleware Async. Okay. This API requires. So this is the root reducer, right? So apply middleware Async. Apply middleware Async, and this one to enable Redux Async, we import this, right? So not this. So why it gives me an error? Let's copy this and paste it here. Middleware is not defined. Alright. Now it seems like let's try it again. If it works. asynchronous fr, right? 1 for asynchronous, right? The reason why we use this is just because you cannot. Sometimes you just need to, do a synchronous action in your action creator file, instead of the component local component itself, right? So because in this case it doesn't really matter, right? So you can just do it yourself, whatever you want, right? It's manually instead of local. But in terms of imagine there are some scenario that this action is actually used by many components at the same time, so you don't want to define this set timeout or async function in your local component yourself, because define it in the action creator could be used by many components at the same time, which will reduce your manpower dramatically, right? So these are several points I'm gonna talk about Redux, and in the next class I'm gonna talk about react-redux, because Facebook has been realized that many people use Redux to manage their global states in their web application, and so therefore they just create a React-Redux themselves, right? So at the beginning, Redux is a third-party library, and till now still it is third party, but this is the basic of the Redux, and yeah, this is pretty about the Redux in React today.